Welcome back, everybody. It's Sunday, so we're not gonna talk about Malazan today. Ain't that fun? Well, I don't know. Anyway, it's Sunday, and I said that Sundays at the moment I'm not gonna do Malazan content, and I'll be back tomorrow with House of Chains, so y'all can look forward to that if that's your kind of thing. And today I'm going to continue from last Sunday with a book y'all should read. And I've picked another one of those short things that I'm currently interspersing between the Malazan reads to, get a change of scenery from time to time. It's another one I've read before. It's even one that I've teased before. And that's Our Lady of Darkness by Fritz Leiber. And I've spoken about Fritz Leiber's amazing Fafhrd and the Grey Mouses series before. I made a long video about that. If you have not watched that, go watch that. If Sword and Sorcery, one of the original Sword and Sorcery stories, a series of stories, a very influential one, is your kind of thing, and you want to get a first look into that, then that I feel is a good introduction. Today I'm going to talk about a different book by Fritz Leiber, and I think it's one that you should read. So let's do this. Cheers. Ooh. All right. Today I will try to structure the whole thing in the following way. I'll give a few really general thoughts, like a synopsis of what it is, without any spoilers. The problem is this is something of a horror book, so there's some spoilers in there that obviously are difficult to avoid. So I'll do all the general stuff, then I'll tell you from when on I'll talk about spoilers. And so if you want to, not be spoiled about stuff, then that's going to happen afterwards. I also talk a bit about why I like this book, because I feel that actually this is an important thing that I'll talk first about, I think. All right, is why I like this book and why it's important to know why I like this book, and why it in general is very important for everyone to know what they like about books and reflect about what they like in writing in general. So let's start with that, then the synopsis, and then the discussion of why this is such an amazing book and y'all should read it with spoilers. Or first the synopsis. All right, first the synopsis. It's a 1977 horror / urban fantasy novel. Now, if you think urban fantasy, that's just because it has supernatural elements and it takes place in a city. It's not your young adult urban fantasy, romance, vampire, whatever novel series that, swamped the market like a decade ago. This is very, very, very different. It's just something with supernatural elements within an urban environment, San Francisco to be exact. And I always said, and I kind of stand by that, it's the book Stephen King always tried to write and never managed. I have a very fraught relationship with Stephen King. Maybe I'll get into that at some point. I just don't think, I think he's massively overrated, although I have a couple of ideas why I think that. And some of them are more like valid than others, I feel. Anyway, so I always said this is a book that Stephen King tried to write and never actually managed to write because he's not as good as Fritz Leiber. And okay, because it takes place in San Francisco. The main character is a writer of supernatural fiction that has fallen on hard times because after the death of his wife, he fell into alcoholism and he's slowly recovering from alcoholism. Now, if you don't see the Stephen King resemblance here at this point already, then I don't know why not. Okay, so he's a writer of supernatural fiction struggling with with his recovery from alcoholism, and then supernatural things happen to him. And it's very much about it's very much informed by these things, like by him being a writer, by the alcoholism and all of that. Obviously, there's an autobiographical thing to that because Fritz Leiber's wife died, and I covered that in my, I think I covered it in my video. So Fritz Leiber's wife died relatively early, and he fell into alcoholism after that for a long time. And so he actually, even, and this is the other part, is he actually lived in the same place that his character Francis Weston lives in San Francisco in the novel. So there's a lot of autobiographical parts in there as well. Same thing with Stephen King. So yeah, there's the parallel. I just think that Our Lady of Darkness is much better than Stephen King, but that's something I'm gonna get into later on. It also has a strong metafictional element to it, and that's something that I like, which is the carefully planned out, improvised way for me to wind my way into that next point that I wanted to make. Why I like this book and why I feel it is important that we know what we like. Now here's the thing. I've said that before in a different video. I feel that reading is a skill that we develop by doing it a lot. And by reading in all kinds of genres. And it's also something that I've said before. And I feel that this gives us as readers, or at least it has given me as a reader, a kind of knowledge or image of what I like and why I like certain things in books, in writers, completely outside of which genre we're talking about. I'll always appreciate the same kind of things, whether it's in a romance novel or it is in a horror novel or in a comedy or whatever. It doesn't matter. I just enjoy wordplay, for example. I enjoy a lot of stuff like references to other stuff, to obscure stuff. Like, don't get me wrong, I like my pop culture references as much as the next guy, but I enjoy them even more once they are a bit more obscure. It's just something I happen to like, which is, for example, why I enjoy Thomas Pynchon a lot, because he does that kind of thing. It's also something I enjoy in Umberto Eco and obviously in a lot of other authors. Terry Pratchett is another one, although he goes all over the place with his references. But, someone who knows how to wield language, it will always intrigue me. Someone who has all these weird connections all over the place to all kinds of other things that I am interested in has my attention, no matter which genre he writes. It's also a reason, I guess, one of the reasons why I personally enjoy the Malazan Books of the Fallen, the Malazan Book of the Fallen so much, because it also has someone writing who knows how to wield language. I also like long, convoluted sentences and complicated or like a large vocabulary. It's another thing that I personally enjoy. So yeah, oh right, Neil Stevenson is another author that I feel like, that I am very happy with as a reader because he touches on the same kind of things. Yeah, I might actually do a video on why y'all should read Snow Crash at some point. Anyway, or any other Stevenson book. But yeah, so those are things that I personally enjoy as a reader. I don't get me wrong, I like a good plot or I like cool characters. But personally, what will always, outside of any kind of genre, intrigue me is very interesting language use and interesting things where I can hang other ideas and thoughts on. That's what I personally enjoy. So, yeah. That's why I think Winnie the Pooh is the perfect novel, because it has all of that. Anyway, so this is something that I personally enjoy, and if you are in any way similar to me or enjoy similar things, that will also mean that all the stuff that I tell you should all read will probably actually be something for you that you might actually enjoy. So why do I enjoy Our Lady of Darkness, and think it's a great novel that you all should read. There's a bunch of things. Some of them are because of spoilers. Some of them are not because of spoilers. I'll start with those that are not because of spoilers or not plot related in a way. And then I'll talk about the plot later on. All right, so what is so interesting about this? There's a bunch of things. One is it is very much a document of its time. Okay? It's very much a document of its time. That's something I personally enjoy. It very much captures this feeling of the late 70s US, like San Francisco area, with all these things. Obviously, because that's the time it was written in. That's the time and place, like the place Leiber lived in. So there's a lot of that in there, and he manages to actually infuse that, that late 70s. The whole weirdness boom of the 60s is slowly died down. People are getting more skeptical of these kind of things, while, or maybe also just getting more jaded, disillusioned. That disillusionment that happened in the entire 70s after, the hippie movement and so on died down, and people and the man once again asserted control, which is something that, for example, Thomas Pynchon writes a lot about in a way more explosive way. But there's some similarities, I would say, between Our Lady of Darkness and what Pynchon does in his novels, at least in those novels that are set around the 60s, 70s. Your Crying a Lot 49, or your even Inherent Vice has a lot of that in there as well. His Vineland, not Vineland, the other one, V. This kind of thing. It's Pynchon's big thing, is like paranoia, the drive for freedom versus the machine that grinds everything down. That's sort of a thing that he's generally very, puts out a lot. And you see some reflections of that here in Fritz Leiber's novel. And it's something I personally like and I personally enjoy. Then paranoia is another thing in here that is very strong. Now, obviously, that's something that you can also see as a side effect of recovering from alcoholism, I suspect. I'm not an expert. I'm not yet recovering. So, but that's something in there that comes across in a very, very powerful way. Another thing that I personally enjoyed, I said that before, is pop culture references or references to stuff that I find interesting, that's obscure, because I tend to like obscure shit. It's just, I don't know why. It's just fun. And there's a lot of that in here as well. And this is where it's also very much a metafiction in there. It's autobiographical. A lot of other authors and stuff appear in there, that people that Fritz Leiber knew, for example. People I personally enjoy. There's artists in there that I personally enjoy. It's like the main plot revolves about a fictitious diary of Clark Ashton Smith. I made a video about Clark Ashton Smith and why he's so amazing. And yeah, he is basically a character in this novel. And the good thing there is that Fritz Leiber met and knew Clark Ashton Smith back in the day. Like, Smith was obviously older than Fritz Leiber, but they met several times and they knew each other. So he's not just writing about an author, like putting him in his book as a character, but he's putting someone in there that he knew, and he puts that man manages it to be right. It feels right. It works. H.P. Lovecraft is referenced, but also people like Dashiell Hammett and the Maltese Falcon. Ambrose Bierce. Go read Ambrose Bierce. He's incredible. George Sterling, Clark Ashton Smith's mentor and poet. People like that. Jack London is an important character, not an important character, a character in this novel. All these people show up and it all fits together. It references their work in a way that makes this story work. And this is just something that I personally enjoy. It's like, for someone who has read some or all of these authors, this will just be very interesting, very much fun to read. Seriously, that's one of the things I really, really enjoy. The sheer way it also sometimes references things. There's like a bit in there where he has a dream, that Franz Weston has a dream about a someone dying or being dead, and the skull and this thing, this plant growing out of the skull and all of that. And this is just so cool because because there is a Clark Ashton Smith horror story about exactly that thing happening. I think it's called The Seed from the Crypt, or the thing from the whatever. I would need to look it up, but there is this one Clark Ashton Smith horror story where it's about two plant hunters, orchid hunters in the Venezuelan jungle, and they stumble upon this ancient city, like lost, like ruins of the city, and there's this crypt, and someone gets infected with this plant that then grows into his brain and out of his brain and turns him into a plant. It's typical Clark Ashton Smith, is what I'm trying to say here. And he basically rips that image from that Clark Ashton Smith story in his book, about where Clark Ashton Smith is a character, although a dead character. It is like he just finds his diary, and then puts that scene into his novel and makes it his own and makes it work there. And that kind of homage makes it really cool for me. Once again, this is just a lot of fun if you have read some stuff and find this interesting. So yeah, I feel now, from now on, I might drop a couple of spoilers. So if you don't want to get spoiled at all, I suggest this is the point where you should click off. If you don't plan on reading the book, or if you don't mind, because once again, I don't feel those spoilers will actually destroy much of the story, because I'm not gonna, talk about the punchline, because I don't actually feel that part is the best. But yeah, this is basically it. All right, clicked off. Perfect. Now I'm talking to no one, which is basically what I do anyway. So here we go. Yes, the point there is obviously that Franz Weston at some point sees this, like, he looks out of his room. He lives in this former hotel. He has an apartment there, and there's some other characters in this apartment that he interacts with, but he's like he's our viewpoint character all the time. He looks out of his room, out of his windows to Corona Heights, this hill on the other, like, outside, that he can look at from his window, and he imagines that he sees some being, some human he thinks is a hippie, because late 70s, on there dancing around or whatever, and he gets intrigued by this hill and decides to go there, and he does that. And, like, when he sits there, he looks back at his apartment, and then he imagines that he sees the same person standing in his window waving at him. And this is obviously a super cool twisted thing, and it's like a funny, scary movie moment. Like, not funny, but it's a cool thing that you can also look at and start thinking about what that means. Like, there's this psychological element to it as well. He talks a lot about Jung and Jungian psychology in here in this book as well. But this idea of like switching places and perspectives it has a visceral effect on me as a reader, at least on me. And from there on, his story unfolds, and he has bought this diary of Clark Ashton Smith, or of someone he thinks is Clark Ashton Smith at this point, together with a book by a guy with a French name, and that is called Megapolisomancy, which is a word and a half. Which this guy wrote supposedly in like the late 19th century, about how megacities distort force and create their own kind of entities, and like power just by the force of so many people, so much matter being cramped in the same place. With the geometry of modern cities, what kind of effects that has. And he does he puts a lot of like thought into this kind of thing, into this fictitious book. And the idea there is that if you know all these things, you might be able to manipulate these forces that are gathered by a large city. Now, this is a really cool magic system, if you will. I mean, it's not a magic system per se, but it's a really cool idea, a really cool theory that also feeds into, and I expect that's like another thing what I meant when I said it's something of a window into a certain frame of time and frame of mind. This is basically what I mean, because this is like the beginning of the whole of ecological awareness in a way that came out of the hippie movement. Like, people are worried about destroying about us humans destroying our planet. They start to worry about nuclear or chemical pollution and stuff like that. And this kind of fits into this idea of this megapolisomancy and the idea of how megacities are dangerous, problematic things for the people that live within it. And yes, so he basically has these books, and he's fascinated by them because he's an author. As I said, he's an author of supernatural fiction. And he's kind of fascinated by it, but also shocked in a way. And then throughout the story, he discovers more and more parallels or like connections between the author of that book, Thibaut de Castries, and his own current situation, and Clark Ashton Smith. So the diary and that book were apparently tied together within when he bought them at a used bookstore. And the diary that he thinks is by Clark Ashton Smith is about Clark Ashton Smith visiting an old, grumpy, old, maybe mad guy that he thinks and then later realizes is this guy Thibaut de Castries, the author, the fictitious author of the Megapolisomancy, and stuff like that. And we basically then have your like average plot. Like, the plot is not that amazing. We have that large info dump basically where he meets with his like sometimes acquaintance poet guy, who has also dabbled in that and has also known Clark Ashton Smith and some other people, and he gives him like in a long discussion when they're both afraid, gives him a long backstory on that guy, on that Thibaut de Castries guy, and then they realize there's more to it. Also, there's apparently a curse laid on Clark Ashton Smith that because the guy de Castries was afraid that Clark Ashton Smith stole all his knowledge and used it for something, and he's grumpy and shit like that. And so he put a curse on Clark Ashton Smith, which apparently didn't work on Clark Ashton Smith, but it may just work on Weston because of dumb circumstances and because of dumb luck. Okay, I kind of leave it at that, because from there on the plot is rather horror-like. He realizes more and more of that. Then there comes a climax, and that's a climax, and then that's that. And yeah, I didn't want to really spoil it for anyone. So yeah, the point there is, why is this so great? It's just done incredibly well. It's just done incredibly well, and Weston's paranoia, mounting paranoia and fear, that is to a large part stems for a large part from the city itself, the city architecture, modernist architecture, and the sheer like size and pressure that one can feel within a large city like San Francisco in this case, comes across really well. I don't know if that's because Fritz Leiber was feeling that kind of paranoia, maybe because of his alcohol withdrawal. I don't know, but he manages to make this like super like nice sunny San Francisco feel scary just by being a big city, because maybe it's all that glass and steel and all those high rises and all that stuff that is actually accumulating negative energy. That's just well done and just really scary. So the the supernatural aspect of it is not really what makes it scary. Like it really scared me even the second time around that I read it. Now it's like I read it like years ago and loved it. Now I read it. It once again made me feel uncomfortable and scared, which is something that a lot of horror does not do. And I personally don't enjoy reading horror books that much. So that's just really cool and something that I really enjoy. So if you've ever felt, I don't know, have you ever like walked alone at night somewhere through a city and suddenly felt just like how the environment around you was threatening, just not afraid of someone walking around, but mostly, but just how suddenly everything feels weird and slightly out of kilter in a way. If you're, I'm pretty sure most of you have done that. I like have felt that kind of thing, unless you don't go out alone at night, which, more power to you. That's actually smart, because it is not the smart thing to do, to walk around alone at 3 a.m. It really isn't. Anyway, so that part is just done really well and touched something in me that I like could connect with and be genuinely scared, or at least was frightened in a way by. That's a big bonus there. That's something that I personally really enjoy about this book. The other thing is obviously all the metafiction crap going on there. So in that long info dump talk between that poet, I keep forgetting his name, something Bias. He's also apparently a very thinly veiled version of a poet friend of Fritz Leiber's, who did write an introduction to the story later on for like a reprint of it, apparently. Anyway, he talks about how De Castris comes to San Francisco at the beginning of the 20th century and starts building this cult around himself, this occult movement around himself and around megapolisomancy. And he gathers all these socialites and artists around himself, which are Jack London, Ambrose Bierce, George Sterling, and some others that I forget about. There's even a maybe connection, probably not connection, but maybe connection to H.P. Lovecraft that's kind of put in there at some point. But the way this is just handled in this amazing way, where he talks about how these things work, and then he makes a reference to maybe that's something that Jack London touched on in his novel The Star Rover. And on the other hand, it also shows it takes the fact that a lot of these people did not die a natural death, as they say, or did not have a wonderful life experience at the end of their lives. Let's put it that way, because it kind of shifts down. But he makes that look like maybe De Castris put a curse on them because they abandoned his magical movement because they got bored with him and didn't actually want to go into his occult revolution thing or whatever. And we get a lot of this sort of occult, pseudo-occult, like it's kind of making fun, metafictionally making fun of occult movements of the late 19th, early 20th century, like your Golden Dawn and your Aleister Crowleys and shit like that. It kind of pokes fun at it, but from a point where you can see that it's done by someone who has sort of secondhand or first-hand experience of how these things work, or talk to the people who were in that kind of weird artsy occult movement or rise of occult movements around the late 19th, early 20th century. And that's just something that I personally enjoy a lot. It's just really, really cool. Because once again, I said I like obscure and occult shit. It is just something, I don't know why. It's not that I believe in it. I'm just fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by occultism, is what I'm saying here, or like weirdness in general. And so he plays on that, and then, as I said, how he manages to include all these small allusions to all these different people. Like he even pulls in Dashiell Hammett and the Maltese Falcon, because he apparently also had some kind of connection to this guy De Castris, and then Clark Ashton Smith, and while this is basically just an info dump and like a story within a story, because it's takes a large part of the story. It's not a big book, right? It's maybe 200 pages, maybe 250 pages, something like that. The audiobook is 6 hours long. It's not that much. Like your average Terry Pratchett is like 200 pages per album, 200 to 300 pages maybe. So yeah, and it's basically a story within a story, and that story, while being more or less just info dump, is just handled so well and done so well for someone like me who's has read quite a few of the like reference people there, and just the sheer artistry of how he manages to connect all those dots. This is something that I, for example, also like very much about Tim Powers. If you've ever read Tim Powers, he's well worth reading, is what I'm saying here. But the ability to look at real history, or like the real world facts and biographies of people, and then find those points where you can actually add a or hang on an occult or fantastic element without changing anything in the real, like anything in the real from the real world established facts. That's just something that Leiber does incredibly well here, and that's something that I respect a lot, and it's something I enjoy a lot. And Our Lady of Darkness does that wonderfully. So yeah, that's the second big thing I enjoy so much about it. All these allusions to stuff. Yeah, you know, your kind of allusions to the what's it called? To the Jungian, the anima and the shadow, like Jungian terminology in there at some point, and the quick asides to music theory and music and Pythagoras. It's I just love those kind of things, is what I'm saying here. And if you love that kind of thing, then I'm pretty sure you enjoy this book. Let's put it this way. And once again, the feeling of dread and paranoia is just something that he manages to capture here in a way that I feel is similar to what Pynchon sometimes does, but it's obviously done on a much easier, like more digestible way, in a much more digestible and easy to digest way compared to Pynchon's stuff. So it's still basically a fantasy, supernatural horror kind of story by someone who is in that genre mold, but kind of breaking out of it by his sheer like craft in a way. It's like Leiber still remains your fantasy and science fiction writer, and he just, you know, goes beyond the sheer, like the general mold of supernatural fiction of the time. And that's just something I appreciate a lot. And that's why I, once again, think that Our Lady of Darkness is such a powerful book. Once again, also, it's very short. While I would not really need that last chapter after the climax, that denouement kind of thing, it doesn't really, you know, add anything or change anything or change a lot, but you know, it's there and it doesn't hurt. Now, obviously, there's some things that might also make it kind of uncomfortable when I said it is a product of its time and of its author. The sexual allusions can make someone uncomfortable in a way. They're definitely there, and they're definitely kind of uncomfortable, or can be uncomfortable. Once again, it's nothing on the level of a Thomas Pynchon when he goes on like writing about sexuality, which he does a lot explicitly. But still, it is the late 70s. There is a more how to say, it's not misogynist in any way, but it's a more objectifying look at women from time to time. And I guess that's something that I've also mentioned, I guess, in my my Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stories. It's there as well. So the problem that I guess makes it more uncomfortable is that it feels like it might be something that is more Fritz Leiber's personal view of women, which Yes, it is, because there's more on Fritz Leiber's view. He had a very difficult relationship with women in general, or female, yeah, with women in general, is what I'm saying here. And it kind of comes through, and I feel that sometimes this can make someone uncomfortable. On the other hand, within this book, this kind of like feeling of uncomfortableness, or whatever you want to call it, this queasiness kind of actually works well with the other, like paranoia and queasiness. It's like you still feel uncomfortable, but this time it kind of fits in the overall atmosphere and feeling, compared to Fritz to the Fafford and Grey Mouse stuff, where you're like, I did not need to know that this guy is very much into rather young female other characters, and into rather young girls, which I find highly problematic. This time around, it's like I feel queasy by that. I don't like that. But there's this additional level of reflection on it, that the character also knows that it's wrong, and that he's kind of attracted to people, to young girls. Young girls, don't get me wrong, this is just generally, there's no, it doesn't become illegal or anything. It's just that the character is a rather older character, and he feels attracted to much younger women there. And I don't know, it feels weird in a way, but the weirdness, like the queasiness, kind of works well here with the overall atmosphere of paranoia and dread and queasiness that a good horror book should like evoke, at least for me, because I'm not into like the splatter or shock effects. That's not something that I personally enjoy a lot. The actual supernatural element is also not what I personally enjoy here. I like it when things stay vague, is what I'm saying here. All right, I guess I've almost rambled way too much about this book. Once again, go read this book if you enjoy urban fantasy, want to look at urban fantasy or urban supernatural fiction that is just done really well by a master of his craft, with really cool ideas, because the overall idea of the city itself being like part of the problem, or being an enemy or a danger, a menace, the city as a city being a menace, is something that is rather rare, I feel, in fiction. I don't want to say unique, but it was pretty unique at the time he wrote this book, and it's just done really well. It's also a short book. I feel that enjoyment definitely is raised if you know or have read some of Leiber's other stuff, have read some of Clark Ashton Smith, some of Lovecraft. He referenced all these stories and all these pulp magazines, so that if you have like looked into the whole culture of fantasy, science fiction, of genre fiction, and how it's produced from like the 1930s to the 1950s, around that area, if that's something you have looked at or have an interest in, or have read some of that stuff, your enjoyment of Our Lady of Darkness will be greater. If you have read Dashiell Hammett, or have read Jack London, or Ambrose Bierce, or just read about those characters, it will also make it more fun, but you don't have to. It's more like, that's the good thing about meta fiction, is that if you get the meta level, it makes more fun. But good meta fiction is still fun if you don't get the meta level, because you're not interested in it. Our Lady of Darkness definitely works as a rather concise, well-crafted horror novel if you don't get any of the cross references and stuff like that. So yeah, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have read the book already, if you have read Our Lady of Darkness, let me know what you think. Once again, I think it's an absolute great book. I wouldn't call it, maybe I would call it a masterpiece. I wouldn't call it the perfect novel, because once again, that is Winnie the Pooh, and you know that. But it is a really good book. It's a quick read. If you want to, scare yourself a bit, maybe try this one, because it's better than Stephen King. It really is. And I'll get into why I hate Stephen King at some other point. All right, I'll talk to you tomorrow about House of Chains. Until then, have a great Sunday evening. Cheers.